You humans! A Pimaverde cried. Get to the shuttles! If I ever see you on this world again, I'll rip your heart out through your throat. I looked over at Linda. She was terrified. She looked at me with a desperate pleading expression, and in that moment I knew that I was about to die. 2 hours earlier. Ah, Rashket. The tropical home world of the Rashklan, or Rashk for short. I'd been expecting the low gravity of the planet, less than a quarter that of Earth, but it still took me aback when I lifted my pack with ease. The 6 of us had just cleared customs, and we ready to enjoy some well-earned R&R, at least until we had to go back to Earth for the next semester of university. So, where to first? Sam asked. The most adventurous of the group, he always phrased things to give his girlfriend Julie a sense of control over the situation, even though it was usually his plans that went ahead. There's a waterfall just over there, looks a 2-minute walk from the spaceport. We could have lunch there and perhaps talk to some of the locals about some of the sights, suggested Linda. As the youngest in the group, she was treated as our little sister, even if she was only a day younger than Sam. Rather on the short side, she more than made up for it with a great mind and a staggering beauty that turned even a few Rashkis' heads in the spaceport. Something about red-haired women drives men of both species wild. I'd loved her for as long as I'd known her, and yet I never managed to tell her how I felt, choking every time I tried. Perhaps I'd manage while we were here, romantic sights and whatnot. Arriving at the waterfall, we were greeted by a small group of Rashk. With an average height of only 1.4 meters and being rather more simian than us, we found their monkey-like appearance slightly amusing. But then again, to them we were giant hairless apes, so the feeling was mutual. However, both groups were of the same age and shared similar psychology. We managed to get a conversation going, aided greatly by the fact that our group had all taken Rashkis at university. It was all going well until Nathan pulled out a can of chilies for his lunch. How he got it past customs is still a mystery. As to be expected, the Rashk freaked out as capsaicin is considered a lethal chemical weapon by most planets in the Galactic Federation. Thankfully the can wasn't opened, but the Rashk wouldn't calm down, nor would they believe that it's considered a seasoning back on Earth. I was scared for a moment that they would call the cops and that our holiday would be over before it had even begun, but that fear didn't last long. It was all too soon interrupted by the sound of gunfire coming from all directions. Pilov! Cried one of the Rashk, as they all started to run back to the spaceport. We ran off after them, easily outstripping them due to the greater muscle density that comes from being a death world species. As we neared the spaceport doors, we saw the Rashk security forces heading out to meet the Pimaverde, hoping beyond hope that they could save us. It was only when we were inside and huddling with other terrified civilians of over a dozen races that we realized that Nick, the 6th and largest member of our group, had been shot. Thankfully, a medic was right nearby and quickly attended to his wound. Despite the chows and our limited Rashkis, we were able to understand her utter bewilderment as to how Nick could have survived a round from a Pimaverde particle rifle, much less run more than 500 meters after being shot. As we would later come to find out, the Pimaverde rifles fired rounds that on Earth would have been considered pathetic, something akin to an overpowered airsoft gun. When coupled with Nick's sheer size and the adrenaline pulsing through him, and that we were a death world species, it was little surprise his wound was classified as not being life-threatening by human doctors. Knowing that his injury was minor, Nick tried several times to convince the medic to just give him some bandage and then move on to the next casualty. However, barely 4 minutes passed after we entered the spaceport before the entire security force was overrun by Pilov fighters. We'd all heard of the Pimaverde, but none of us had ever seen them up close. They were the other, less talked about native species on Rashket. They stood an average of 2.3 meters tall, and had a rather reptilian look to them despite being mammals. While the Federation had deemed them no longer a threat, they were still considered the most violent race outside of the insectoids of Yersinia pestis. How both races had managed to survive for so long was a mystery. The Pilov loved to kill one another, yet hated the Rashk even more, calling them the Kun Karsh, or living trash. Despite having a primitive tribal structure, they had somehow figured out how to mass produce some rather fine rifles. Rifles I feared were about to be turned on us. Some of the pilots started ordering us around, separating us by species, while others set up camera and broadcasting equipment in the main lobby. Sam was the first to pick up what was going on. "It's genocide," he whispered to us. "They're going to broadcast executions for the world to see. It's the only thing that makes sense. Why else would they separate us by species?" As much as I hated to think about it, he was right. The question was, which species would be first? It was then that a pilot lieutenant walked over to where the humans were being kept. He told us that their anger today was directed at the Roshk, and that we were to leave and tell the other planets to stay out of their business. He added that as any of our species ever came back, he would kill us. I looked over at Linda and saw a desperate pleading in her eyes, and the pain for a species not ours, yet facing extermination. She had always made me want to be a better man, and then was the time for me to step up. In that moment, I realized I was about to die. I turned to Nathan. "You still got that chili?" I whispered. "Yeah, why?" he asked while subtly handing it over. "Tell Linda I've always loved her." Taking a deep breath, I stood and turned to face the pilot lieutenant. "You got a death wish, human? Get over to the shuttle and get off my planet," he yelled. "Do you know what chilies are?" I asked, sounding a lot calmer than I felt. "What's that got to do with anything?" I pulled out the can. "Well, apparently they're Class 3 chemical weapons, seeing as how they contain capsaicin. You wouldn't. You'll all die." The pilot looked panicked. He seemed to know what I was talking about. 5 pilot fighters raised their weapons at me as I opened the can, all of them desperate to run from the can of chilies and the man holding it. I picked one out the can and held it in front of me for a moment, the pilot getting more and more anxious by the second. I looked the lieutenant right in the eyes and smiled as I ate it, even showing my empty mouth as proof I'd swallowed it. All but the lieutenant ran, fear rooting him to the ground. "Get the hell away from me! Get away from me or I will kill your friends! Starting with her!" he shrieked, gesturing at Linda. That was the last mistake he ever made. I charged at him, filled with rage. I may have had a lean build, but with a few years of martial arts and more adrenaline than I'd even thought possible pulsing through me, I figured I had a chance. The pilot got off a short burst into me before I ripped the rifle from his hands and threw all my strength into a punch to his chest. What I hadn't taken into account was the low gravity. Their bones were nowhere near as dense as ours, and so my fist demolished his sternum and passed straight through to his heart. I turned around to horrified gasps. Turns out that 5 of the lieutenant's rounds had hit me, 2 in the chest and 3 in the lower abdomen. "Isn't coming from a death world wonderful?" I remarked before turning away and heading for the pilot captain. He was easy to find, being 2.5 m tall. The pilot fighters all looked at me and trembled. Even the captain didn't seem too comfortable seeing something half his size unhindered by more bullet wounds than would be needed to take down the largest of his fighters. "You're going to let all of these Roshk, and everyone else here go, unharmed. Then you're going to go back into whatever hole you crawled out of and never bother them again," I told him. By this point I had gone beyond fear. Only cold and calculated thoughts endured. "And who are you to demand this of me?" the captain replied. I raised my bloodied fist, fragments of the lieutenant's sternum embedded in the skin. "One of your lieutenants shot me 5 times at point-blank range before I punched right through his chest, yet I'm the one who's still standing. Now I'm only a civilian. Imagine what a trained human soldier could do. Perhaps 100, maybe even 1,000. In fact, humanity has a history of genocide and we're very good at it. It wouldn't be too difficult to get 1,000,000 of us over here to wipe you all out." The captain stared at me for a few moments, then the thought of what I just told him took over, and he was overwhelmed by fear. All the BX were out the door within a minute. 2 hours later. "There, that should do it," said the Roshk medic as she finished stitching up my wounds. "You'll need to have this checked by medics of your own species, but this should hold you over until you reach the Terran Navy cruiser coming to pick you humans up." Then again, you Death World species don't like to play by the same rules as us, so I wouldn't be surprised if you've fully healed before you get there. I chuckled at that, which hurt a lot. We don't heal that fast, and now that the adrenaline is wearing off, the pain is returning. Still, thank you for patching Nick and I up. The medic glanced at something behind me and stood to leave. I'm finished here, I'll leave you two to alone, she said, smiling. I looked over to see Linda standing a few feet away. That was really brave of you, saving all those people, she said. Her smile had returned. Somehow, amongst all the devastation, she looked even more beautiful. This is it, I thought. This is my moment to tell her how I feel. I opened my mouth to speak, and nothing came out. Great, I can stand face to face with a 2.5M lizard thing that wants to kill me, but I can't tell a woman how I feel about her.